4 of the metabolic pathways lectures. We're going to begin with cellular respiration, and cellular respiration is broken down into 4 stages. The first stage is known as glycolysis. And basically, glycolysis breaks down glucose, which has 6 carbons, into 2 molecules of pyruvate, which contain 3 carbons each. I try not to get too caught up in the details of these different stages, except for the electron transport chain, and I like for you to understand that because it's more of a process. But glycolysis is a series of chemical reactions. This just shows you the beginning and the end of that series of reactions. We start out with glucose, which has, I'm going to circle every carbon atom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 carbon atoms in glucose, and so when glucose breaks down, it forms into pyruvate, which only contains 3 carbon atoms. So therefore, it forms 2 molecules of pyruvate. In addition, glycolysis produces 2 molecules of ATP directly. It produces 4 and uses 2, and that leaves you with 2 that are overall produced by glycolysis. And glycolysis also produces 2 molecules of NADH. And just to remind you, the NADH is going to be a molecule that supplies hydrogen ions and electrons to the last stage of cellular respiration. Now, this shows you all the series of reactions that occurs from glucose all the way to generation of pyruvate. Okay, here. So as you can see, there's a lot of different reactions that occur. It's not just one simple step. And I don't know that we're going to talk about this anymore during this PowerPoint slide, presentation. But just so you know, the reason that all these reactions occur in such a large series, so many different chemical reactions, instead of just everything happening in one reaction. The reason this happens is because it makes cellular respiration more energy efficient. You get way more ATP produced out of cellular respiration when it occurs in all these different steps, in all these different series of or cascades of chemical reactions. Okay? But overall, in the first half of glycolysis, 2 ATP molecules are used. In the second half, 4 ATP are produced, so that means a net of 2 is produced by glycolysis, and 2 NADHs are produced. So 2 pyruvates, 2 ATPs, and 2 NADHs are produced at the end of glycolysis. And glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. That's important, in the cytoplasm of cells. The rest of these reactions are going to occur in the mitochondria. And so pyruvate oxidation occurs when there is oxygen present, okay? And the pyruvate is broken down into an acetyl group, which is a 2-carbon group, and a coenzyme A is attached to it, so we just call it acetyl-CoA, acetyl-CoA. So the oxidation of pyruvate starts with the 2 molecules of pyruvate, and then they're converted into 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Here we go. For each pyruvate, you get one acetyl-CoA, and during that process, we also produce one carbon dioxide and one NADH. So if we sum that process up, the products of this step, the oxidation of pyruvate, are 2-acetyl-CoA molecules, which are their purpose is they are going to enter the citric acid cycle. No ATP is produced by this step, pyruvate oxidation, but 2 carbon dioxide molecules are produced and just given off as waste into the atmosphere, and 2 NADH molecules are produced, which we know are going to be a source of hydrogen ions and electrons for the electron transport chain. And then the next step is the citric acid cycle. And by the way, okay, I told you that glycolysis occurred in the cytoplasm. From this point forward, the reactions occur in the mitochondria, starting with the oxidation of pyruvate and now the citric acid cycle and then the electron transport chain. They all occur in the mitochondria. The citric acid cycle is another series of reactions, and I'm much more interested in you knowing the purpose and the overall products of the citric acid cycle. The citric acid cycle does generate 2 ATP molecules by these ATPs, by the way, that have been produced, the 2 that were produced in glycolysis and the 2 that are going to be produced by the citric acid cycle, are being produced by substrate level phosphorylation. Substrate level phosphorylation is what's being used to produce the 2 ATP molecules from glycolysis and the citric acid cycle. But primarily, the purpose of the citric acid cycle is to produce more of those NADH molecules and FADH2 molecules, which will carry hydrogen ions and electrons to the electron transport chain. So as you can see here, acetyl-CoA enters the citric acid cycle. It combines with a 4-carbon molecule called oxaloacetate to produce citric acid or citrate, which has 6 carbons. The citric acid or citrate, which contains 6 carbon atoms, it may have crossed your mind that we begin with glucose, which contains 6 carbons, and now we're back at another 6-carbon molecule. But remember, the purpose of all of these different series or cascades of different chemical reactions is because it makes cellular respiration more energy efficient. We can produce way more ATP by this process than if the reaction just occurred all in one step. Okay, so during these series of reactions, NADHs are produced, NADH molecules are produced, and FADH molecules are produced, as well as carbon dioxide is given off, and 2 ATP molecules are produced. So the products of the citric acid cycle are going to be 6 NADH molecules, 2 FADH2 molecules, 2 ATP molecules directly by substrate level phosphorylation, and 4 molecules of carbon dioxide given off to the atmosphere. And then we have the last step, which is technically chemiosmosis, is the process that occurs. Sometimes this step is just called the electron transport chain. But the electron transport chain is actually a series of protein molecules called electron transporters that are embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Remember, the mitochondria has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. And so it's in these protein molecules that you see that are blue, They're embedded within that inner membrane. So what happens during this process is oxidative phosphorylation. The hydrogen atoms from NADH and FADH2 are used as a source of hydrogen ions and electrons. So we'll start with what happens to the electrons. The electrons are transported from carrier molecule to carrier molecule, from high energy level to a low energy level, releasing energy as they go. They're finally used along with hydrogen ions to produce water, hydrogen ions and oxygen to produce water. You may recognize that this is the opposite of what happens in photosynthesis. The energy from the electrons being moved down the electron transport chain, is used to pump hydrogen ions out. Hydrogen ion pump hydrogen ions out of the membrane. And so hydrogen becomes very concentrated outside that inner membrane, in the intermembrane space. And since the concentration is high, the concentration of these hydrogen ions is high outside, when they encounter ATP synthase, they are going to diffuse down their concentration gradient, and that flow of hydrogen ions is going to create the energy to form ATP. Okay, so this process we learned already in photosynthesis. It is called oxidative phosphorylation. It's the same process in photosynthesis as in cellular respiration. It's using hydrogen ions and electrons in order to produce ATP molecules. Okay, so the only difference is hydrogen in in photosynthesis, hydrogen is pumped into the thylakoid, and in cellular respiration, in the electron transport chain, the hydrogen ions are pumped out of that inner membrane into the intermembrane space between the inner and the outer membrane. And so it's just that they're pumped out, whereas in photosynthesis, hydrogen ions are pumped in. Just the direction that they're pumped is different. Okay, so this is showing you how ATP is produced by oxidative phosphorylation, and the amount of ATP that you can get from cellular respiration when it occurs this way, with all 4 steps that we just went over, is 36 to 38 ATP molecules. You can produce up to 34 during this step right here. But total, when you add them with the 4 that have already been produced, you can get 36 to 38 ATP molecules. Now, if oxygen is not present, cellular respiration can occur, but it is anaerobic. Instead of aerobic, we call it anaerobic. So there are 2 types of anaerobic cellular respiration that we are going to learn, and they are on both types of fermentation. There's lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation happens in muscle cells that have run out of oxygen, from exercise, for example. And since they've run out of oxygen, their cells are still trying to make ATP without oxygen present. So basically, glycolysis is occurring. Glucose is being produced to pyruvate, or being broken down into pyruvate, and then a second reaction happens that converts pyruvate into 2 molecules of lactic acid, and only 2 ATPs are produced per glucose molecule during this process. In alcohol fermentation, glucose is broken down into pyruvate again, which is then converted into 2 molecules of ethanol plus carbon dioxide gas.